After I refused to fire our nanny, my husband locked her in the pantry, dumped flour over her head, and told me, pick sides or lose everything. His mother clapped, staff should know their rank. I opened the back door to the neighbor holding a baby monitor and said, she heard every word, because my husband's name is Preston. His mother's name is Adela. The nanny's name is Louisa. And the neighbor who changed everything is named Gretchen. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a dramatic person. I have never in 41 years of living made a scene at a restaurant, raised my voice in a parking lot, or posted anything on Facebook more heated than a recipe dispute about whether cornbread belongs with sugar in it. I have 2 kids under 6, a mortgage on a house with a roof that needs replacing, and a husband I spent 11 years building a life with. I am the kind of woman who takes a breath before she responds. I say I understand when I don't. I smooth things over because the alternative felt expensive. I want you to know that, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like something I invented. It was a Saturday in October. I remember the light was coming through the kitchen window at that low afternoon angle that makes everything look warmer than it is. Our nanny Louisa had been with us for 3 years. She had been there when my daughter Petra, no, wait, I can't use that name. My daughter's name is Nell. She had been there when Nell had a febrile seizure at 14 months and I was 40 minutes away in traffic. Louisa had called 911, ridden in the ambulance, and held Nell's hand until I got there. She was 26 years old and she loved my kids like they were her own family. Preston had been trying to get me to fire Louisa for 4 months. It started in June, when he decided she'd given him a look he didn't like. That's the exact phrasing. A look. I asked what kind of look and he said, the kind that says she thinks she's equal to us. I remember sitting very still with that sentence. I didn't say anything for a moment. And then I said, she's a person, Preston. He left the room. July, he complained she was on her phone too much. I checked with her. She'd been texting her mother, who was having a health scare. I told Preston. He shrugged and said, that's not my problem. August, he told me Louisa had rearranged something in the kitchen and he didn't appreciate her touching his things. I pointed out it was also my kitchen. He went quiet in the particular way he had, where his jaw set and his eyes went somewhere colder, and I knew I was supposed to feel like I'd made an error. I didn't fire her. That Saturday in October, I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard the pantry door slam. Not close, slam, with the frame rattling. Then my husband's voice, flat and certain, saying, stay in there until I'm done talking to my wife. I came to the top of the stairs. Preston was standing in the kitchen doorway and his mother Adela was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee mug and her reading glasses and her particular expression that she saved for moments when Preston was doing something she approved of. That expression was a small, tight smile, like she was watching a performance she'd paid for. I said, what did you just do? Not a question. I already knew. She was disrespectful, Preston said. She told me I was being unfair to her. She was right. Go open it, I said. Right now. We are having a conversation first, he said. You and me. About whether this is my house or whether it isn't. I started coming down the stairs and Adela made a small sound, not quite a word, more like a warning note, and Preston held up one hand toward me. Like a traffic cop. Like I was a vehicle he had the authority to stop. She's been undermining me for months, he said. She speaks to me like I'm someone she has to tolerate. I won't have it in my own home. Our home, I said. I was on the 3rd step from the bottom. Your name isn't on the mortgage, he said. I went still. He knew exactly what he'd said. He'd been saving that one. From the pantry I could hear nothing and that was almost worse than if I could hear something. Louisa was in there being silent because she was smart enough to know that making noise would only make it worse for her. I thought about that. I thought about the fact that she'd learned that. That she'd had to learn it in my house. Then Adela stood up from the table and walked to the pantry door and I thought for 1 second she was going to open it. She didn't. She picked up the 5-pound bag of bread flour from the counter next to the pantry. I had been baking that morning, it was sitting open, and she held it in both hands and she looked at me and she said, Preston, finish this. Preston opened the pantry door. Louisa was standing in there in the dark with her back straight and her hands at her sides. She looked at me first. Then she looked at Preston. He took the flour bag from his mother and he appended it over Louisa's head. The sound it made was almost nothing. Just a soft, dense rush of white powder, and then Louisa standing there covered in flour with her eyes closed and her arms still at her sides because she had the kind of dignity that doesn't require motion to be visible. Adela clapped. 3 slow claps, like applause at a recital. Staff should know their rank, she said. I couldn't breathe. Preston set the empty bag down on the counter and looked at me. Pick sides, he said. Or lose everything. And then I heard the back door. Not a knock. Just the sound of the glass panel rattling, and when I turned, Gretchen was standing at the back door with her hand raised to knock and her face, I will never forget her face. Gretchen lives in the house directly behind ours. Her yard backs up to our yard and there's a low fence between us, and she has been our neighbor for 6 years and I have always liked her without knowing her especially well. She was holding a baby monitor in her left hand. The white plastic kind, the receiver unit, with the small speaker on the front. I crossed the kitchen and opened the back door. Gretchen looked past me at Louisa standing in the pantry doorway covered in flour. She looked at Adela. She looked at Preston. Then she looked at me and she held up the monitor and said, she heard every word. The monitor in her hand had a green audio light blinking on the front. I had a transmitter unit somewhere in my kitchen, I had used them when Nell was small. And I thought I'd put the whole set in the cabinet above the refrigerator. Gretchen's yard backed to ours. The monitors were cheap and the range was wide and apparently the transmitter was still plugged in somewhere because the receiver in Gretchen's hand had been picking up audio from my kitchen for God knows how long. She had the whole thing. Preston said, what is she doing here? Gretchen said, I called the police about 4 minutes ago. Preston's face changed. You need to leave, he said to her. This is a private residence and you need to, they're on their way, Gretchen said. She didn't move. She was holding the door frame with her free hand and she looked like someone who had decided something and was not going to be talked out of it. And I have everything recorded from when you told her to get in the pantry. I looked at Louisa. She was wiping flour from her eyes with the back of her hand. Her shirt was ruined. Her hair was white. She had not made a sound. I said, come here, Louisa. She walked out of the pantry and stood next to me and I put my arm around her shoulders and I felt her shaking, very slightly, the way a person shakes when they've been holding themselves rigid for too long. Preston said, this is not what it looks like. Nobody answered him. Adela said, this is a private family matter and I suggest, sit down, I said to Adela. I had never in 11 years spoken to that woman in that tone. She sat down. I want to tell you what happened in the next 72 hours because that's where the actual story is. The flour on the floor and the police at the door, that was just the beginning. The officers arrived 11 minutes after Gretchen's call. 2 of them. I met them at the front door while Gretchen stayed in the kitchen with Louisa. Preston had been pacing and making calls, I could hear him on the phone, low and urgent, talking to someone, using the word overreaction 3 times in 2 minutes. Adela had not moved from the kitchen table. She had, however, poured herself more coffee. The officers took statements. Louisa's. Mine. Gretchen's. Gretchen handed over the monitor receiver and told them she had the transmitter recording on her phone. She had been recording the audio from the monitor speaker with her phone for the last 20 minutes after she heard the pantry door slam and Preston's voice and understood what was happening. The officers took her phone number. They took Preston's name. They were professional and careful and one of them kept looking at Louisa's flour-covered hair with an expression I recognized as controlled anger. Preston was not arrested that night. I want to be honest about that. Unlawful imprisonment is a real charge but the process takes time and that night there were statements and documentation and a case number. What there was not, by the end of that night, was Preston in my house. I told him to leave. He told me I was making a catastrophic mistake. I told him to get his overnight bag and his laptop and go to his mother's, and Adela, for the first time in 11 years, had nothing to say. She gathered her coat and her purse and her reading glasses and she left without looking at me. Preston stood in the front doorway and said, "You are going to regret this." "Your name is on the mortgage," I said. "Mine isn't. So I need you to think hard about what you're willing to do next, because I have nothing to lose and you have everything." He left. Now here is what I did in the next 4 days, and I need you to understand I did all of it very quietly, the way I do everything. Louisa had a cousin who was a paralegal. I had known this for 3 years and never had reason to use it. I had her cousin's number in my phone from a conversation about a lease dispute Louisa had had 18 months ago. I called her the next morning. Her name was Franca. She was 29 and precise, and when I explained the situation she said, "Send me everything you have and don't talk to him without recording it." I had more than I realized. I had 4 months of texts from Preston telling me to fire Louisa. I had the specific text from August where he described her as that woman and said she needed to understand her place. I had a text from September where he'd written, "If you won't handle it, I will." I had not understood that text as a threat when I received it. I understood it now. Gretchen's recording from the monitor was 43 minutes of audio. It started with Preston telling Louisa she was out of line for questioning his decision to cut her hours. That was the conversation I hadn't known about, the one that had apparently started the whole thing, and it ended with him taking the flour from Adela and the sound of it hitting Louisa and Adela's 3 slow claps and "Staff should know their rank." 43 minutes. Clean audio. Franca listened to the whole thing and called me back and said, "I need you to know this is significantly worse than you described." The case for unlawful imprisonment was being reviewed. That was Franca's lane. But there was a second lane I had not thought about yet. Preston was a senior project manager at a construction firm. He had been there 9 years. He made good money and he was respected there, and he socialized with his colleagues and their wives, and he had built a reputation over those 9 years as someone solid and reliable and fair. He was well liked. He went to the company golf tournament every spring. He and his direct manager, a man named Clark, went to the same church. His company had a human resources department. They had a code of conduct. They had, like most mid-sized firms, a policy about employee conduct that extended to conduct outside the workplace, specifically conduct involving any person employed in a household capacity, given that the firm handled contracts involving residential properties and had been very deliberately careful about its public image since a lawsuit 4 years back that I knew about because Preston had talked about it. I am not going to pretend I knew all of this independently. Franca helped me understand the landscape. She was very good. I sent the HR department an email on Tuesday. I attached the audio file. I attached the relevant text messages. I described the incident clearly and without editorializing. I explained that the matter was under police review. I noted the relevant code of conduct section, which Franca had identified, and I said I was not seeking any specific outcome from the company but felt they had a right to know. I hit send at 9:47 in the morning. By noon Preston had called me 6 times. I did not answer. At 2:15 he texted, "What did you do?" At 3 o'clock he texted, "I am going to lose my job." At 3:44 he texted, "You need to call me right now." At 4:30 he texted, "I am outside the house." That one made me pick up the phone. Not to call him, to call Franca, who told me that if he came to the door I was to say nothing and call the non-emergency line. He didn't come to the door. He sat in the driveway for 40 minutes and then he left. But that was Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, something had happened that I had not planned and had not expected. Gretchen had told one person. Her sister, who lived 3 miles away. Her sister had told her book club, not as gossip, she had told them because one of the women in the book club also employed a nanny and had been having issues with her husband treating that nanny in ways that made her uncomfortable. The story traveled in that specific way that real stories travel, with names attached, with the detail about the flower, with the detail about Adela's 3 slow claps. By Wednesday afternoon it had reached 3 people who knew Preston professionally. By Thursday it had reached Clark. I know this because Clark called me Thursday morning. He introduced himself carefully and said he wanted to make sure I understood the company was taking the matter seriously. I said I appreciated that. He said he wanted to ask a few questions if I was willing. I said I was willing. He asked if I could tell him what I had observed directly. I told him. He thanked me. He asked if the recording was available. I said Franca could facilitate that. He paused and then he said, "Mrs." and I stopped him and said just my first name was fine. He said, "I want to be honest with you. This is not the first complaint." I went very still. "There have been 2 prior incidents," he said. "Both involving support staff. both in the past 3 years. Both resolved quietly, at the time, because there were no recordings. He stopped. Then he said, "There are recordings now." Preston was placed on administrative leave Thursday afternoon. I know because he left a voicemail that was 8 minutes long. And I listened to all of it. He said I had betrayed him. He said I had taken the word of an employee over my own husband. He said his mother had been right about me from the start. He said he had given me everything and I had dismantled it out of spite. At the very end of the voicemail, his voice changed. It got smaller. He said, "I need you to tell them it was a misunderstanding. I need you to say it was a bad day and things got out of hand. I need you to fix this, because I can't lose this job. Please." I saved the voicemail. I sent it to Franca. I did not call him back. Now let me tell you about Friday, because Friday was when I posted. I want to be clear about what I posted and why. I did not post to humiliate Preston in the abstract. I posted because Louisa needed people to know what had been done to her, and because I had already had 3 people reach out to me through Gretchen's network asking if the story was true and whether they should be concerned about their own household employees, and because I believed then and believe now that the thing Adela said, "Staff should know their rank," is the kind of statement that deserves to be said in public by the person who said it. I kept it simple. I posted the audio. Not all 43 minutes. 6 minutes, edited by Franca's contact, starting with Preston's voice saying, "Stay in there until I'm done talking to my wife," and ending with 3 slow claps and "Staff should know their rank." I wrote 4 sentences. This is what happened in my kitchen on October 14th. The woman covered in flour has worked for our family for 3 years and did nothing wrong. Her name is Louisa and she deserves better than what was done to her. I am posting this because silence is also a choice. Within 4 hours it had 200 shares. By Saturday morning it had been shared 1,400 times. Adela had a Facebook page. She had posted on it regularly for 8 years. She had 312 friends, mostly church people and family and the women from her garden club. She had, as recently as October 12, posted a photo of herself at a fall festival with the caption "Grateful for family and community." By Saturday afternoon, her comments section was not discussing the fall festival. She deleted her Facebook account at approximately 4 p.m. Saturday. I know the approximate time because 4 different people screenshotted her profile before she could delete it and sent those screenshots to me. One of them was a woman from Adela's own church who included a personal message that said, "I have watched her treat service workers this way for 20 years. Thank you for finally saying something out loud." Preston's administrative leave became a termination on the following Monday. Franca informed me of this not because she had any inside knowledge but because Preston called me at 8:30 a.m. Monday and said, "They fired me," and I happened to have my phone on speaker while I was making breakfast and Franca was sitting at my kitchen table with her coffee because she had been helping me prepare documentation for the next step. "They fired me," Preston said. 9 years. 9 years and they just, "Are you happy? Is this what you wanted?" I said, "You locked a woman in a pantry and poured flour over her head." He said, "It wasn't, you told me to pick sides," I said. I picked. I hung up. The police matter moved forward over the following 3 weeks. The charge that ultimately proceeded was not the one I expected. It was not unlawful imprisonment, which was difficult to make stick given the short duration, though it was documented. It was a misdemeanor assault charge, based on the flour, based on the audio, based on Louisa's statement and mine. Franca's attorney contact handled Louisa's side. Preston agreed to a plea rather than go to trial because going to trial meant the audio being entered into public record and his attorney apparently advised him that was not a position he wanted to be in. The plea meant a fine, community service, and a misdemeanor on his record. That misdemeanor meant that the project manager license he'd held for 7 years, the one that had let him work at the level he'd worked at, required review. The review took 6 weeks. At the end of it, the license was not revoked but it was restricted, and the restriction meant he could not manage residential projects. Which was most of what he'd done for 9 years. He is currently, as of when I'm writing this, employed part-time at a firm that does commercial inspections. He makes roughly 40% of what he made before October 14th. Adela is not on Facebook anymore. She is not, from what I understand through the family members who still speak to me, received well at her church since the audio circulated. The garden club has, politely and without drama, stopped inviting her to events. Her son is sleeping in her spare bedroom. I filed for divorce in November. Preston did not contest the asset division as aggressively as he'd intended to, possibly because Franca's attorney made it clear that the audio, the texts, the HR documentation, and the voicemail would all be available if he chose to litigate extensively. We settled in February. I kept the house. Both kids are with me. He has scheduled visitation. Louisa still works for us. She got a raise in November. I know the timing was maybe too pointed, but I did it anyway. She cried a little when I told her. I told her she never had to apologize for the things she said to Preston that day, that she had been right. She said, "I know I was right. I just didn't know you knew it too." That sentence stayed with me. Gretchen came to dinner in December. She brought wine and a candle, and she sat at my kitchen table in the same chair Adela had been sitting in on October 14th. And she said, "I almost didn't knock. I stood at the back door for a minute and almost just went home." I said, "What made you knock?" She said, "I heard the flower hit." I thought about Louisa standing in the dark of that pantry with her back straight and her arms at her sides. I thought about Adela's 3 slow claps and her voice saying staff should know their rank, and I thought about how certain she had been in that moment, how completely sure she was that those words would land and settle and become the permanent truth of my kitchen. Adela was wrong about a lot of things. But she was right about one. Staff should know their rank. Louisa's rank, in my house, is irreplaceable. Preston's rank is a spare bedroom and 40%. And Adela's rank, in the community she spent 30 years building, is the woman whose voice is on the recording, the one who clapped. That's permanent. That's not a thing you recover from when it's in audio, when 1,400 people have shared it, when the women from your church have heard your own voice say it and looked at each other and said finally. Preston left one more voicemail in March. He said he hoped we could find a way to move forward. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said he thought if we could just talk, like adults, we might be able to understand each other better. He said the kids needed their parents to be on good terms. He said, "I've changed." I listened to the whole thing while I was washing dishes. Nell was in the living room watching something loud and my son was asleep and the kitchen was warm and the low afternoon light was coming through the window again, that October light, and I thought about the person I used to be who took a breath before she responded and said I understand when she didn't. I deleted the voicemail. I didn't take a breath first.